Hey guys, welcome back to the much awaited episode of Viper iOS application development using Viper, which is long due now. So, I'm gonna start with creating a very basic application. Nothing, no major features or screen transitions. It's just a basic app where if you have, we will have three sliders which will contribute to values for red, green, and blue, three color combinations to create a background. So, whenever that changes, the background of our current view will change. So, that's the basic idea of this application. I'll be building it initially using plain view controller approach where we will just have the one file normal. I have seen many developers these days even now creating big applications with just one view controller without creating different layers and modularizing things. So by this approach I can just start showing you how to create the way it's normally done to the way using Viper. So let's get started. So let me just start creating a single view app. Let's call it Viper Basic Slider. It just the whole idea is to just create something as a structure and then building from there. So we will keep building different applications from now on where it will be built using Viper, but it will have its own features. So starting with this very basic to enhanced version where we'll have complex routing, etc. So the whole idea right now is to just show you how to even create the basic structure for a Viper applications. So even before that, let's get started with this one where we will have just the view controller approach initially where let me just add first thing first, let's rename this. Let me call it home view controller because this is where everything will happen. This is my home where I need to build everything around it. So even this might have gotten renamed now to home view controller. So that's done. Let me add a not yet. Let me add some components here in here. So starting with the three sliders. Let's keep the whole thing inside a stack view and then add a spacing among them, maybe 40. Yeah, that's okay. And then add constraints around the slider, around the stack view. So let it be horizontally aligned and then have a top spacing, maybe width and height. So that's pretty much sorted. And then let's add a label, this just to represent the changes happening to the slider, which will just capture the RGB value changes which is happening. So include that. We change the font, stylize a little, and then not 20 is too much, 30. Okay, and then align it center, add a width and height to it, have its spacing aligned to the stack view, vertical spacing, maybe center it, align it center to the whole thing. So that's done. And let's set the max values. So let the current value be 0, 255. That's a max value for a color picker. Let's say if you have RGB values will be within this range of 0 to 55. Just keeping as base here 00. So right now, if this is the current value which we need to choose, then it will be the black color, which is 000. So let's keep that right now, and let's just keep an initial value here. So this is how it is going to get structured. Maybe reduce the font a little more because it can take up more value here. So I'm just changing that. So that's my RGB. And then let's create outlets. So whatever I'm trying to demonstrate here is the normal approach using view controllers, so which we fondly call MVC, which I don't much believe in. Okay, that got me wrong there. Should have been red. Should be blue. And the center one being the green one. So that's done. So we have the three outlets. Let's now create 3 value changes for each outlet. So on red value change, so this can be built even better, but I'm just trying to demonstrate the I won't call it the worst way, but then some ideal way of doing it. So we have the 3 elements captured. Also, let's add an outlet to this label. So that, let's call it LBL RGB value. So that's pretty much whatever we need as outlets. Let's just increase this to maybe that's it. So let's go back to our home view controller. So all that we need to right now do is start capturing the changes. So whenever there is a change happening, it'll trigger a value change. So red value received. So that will be sender dot value. Green value received. And blue value received. So whenever we start receiving, whenever we change, we'll start getting these values. Let's do a basic sanity now. Let's run it and see. The app is running. It shows me the 3 sliders, and whenever the value changes, you can see that it's triggering the logs here. So all things are fine. So let's now start building the basic stuff for it to work. So what should happen now? So whenever there is a value change, it should be displayed in this label, as well as it should change the background color based on the RGB chosen. So 2 things we need to do. So let's create a protocol. So on color value change, okay, it should be color change, color value delegate. Let's call it color value delegate, and then let's have a function on color value change. So that's a whole thing I need, and let let's implement it. So this will just track color value changes, track color value changes. It's just setting those values here. So whenever there's a color value change, we'll just call this here. Nothing major, it's just a function call happening, and it'll trigger the RGB changes here. So all that we need to track here is we don't use the sender, instead we'll directly use a controls value. So let's call red value, which we will receive. So one other thing, okay, even before that, let's do that. Red will be slider red dot value, so that's a float value we'll receive. Red green slider green dot value, and blue is slider blue dot value. So these three values what we receive. Let's print it. RGB, and then let's call red. Green, blue. So let's see what happens now. So you can start changes, but we don't need it for each and every value. We need just include a step of one change, let's say 1 2 3. It should not give the rounded value. So for that, let's do one thing. Let's add something called as a step is equal to 1 float type float, and let's round off these values. So by this we are making sure that it's rounded off to each one step value. So just show you how it works. So now we have the new rounded values. So you can see that it's just stepping by one value now because of that change. So that's pretty much sorted. We added a step, that's it. And that being done, let's try to set the view's background color. So it should be UI color, and pass these params, red, green, CG float. So we have to convert all of these to CG float and then pass it. So it will not make much difference when we actually convert it from here itself, because whatever we are showing here is not going to change. Let's just convert it to CG float. Just pass this whole value to this. And that's now our CG float value. And one other thing is, whatever value we are getting, we need to divide it by 255 to be accepted here. So that's another thing we need to do. And let's keep the alpha as 1 itself. So basically whatever we tried doing is we are trying to set the background color based on the slider values that we are changing, which directly translates to the values of RGB. So let's try doing that now. So it starts with black, if you can see. So it works now. We not able to see this value. Let's just correct that. It's a minor thing. So that we maybe reduce this font size to maybe 25. That it's visible, and make it condensed or something. Now it's pretty much okay. So that basics thing is done. So whenever it is 000, it's all black, and whenever we try changing it to some other color, it changes it. So this is our first use case which we try to solve. That is like whenever the slider value changes, it changes the background color as well as updates this. So that is one use case we solved. Now another use case is, let's say I relaunch the app, it should retain the value which I had provided and then just show it initially. But as you can see now, it's not retaining it and it's always resetting it to the new value. So let's use these user defaults and then solve that issue. Not going into use any database there, but then let's start basic with the user settings. So let's go back, create some functions. So let me call the function as save current color. So let me just start basic stuff. So I'm just using user defaults, and then user default, what is the user defaults? Standard, okay. And then we can set the current value. Maybe we might have to use, let's save this red, green and the blue values as the CG float value directly. Let's pass it this red value. So then let's modify this function because it needs to accept the RGB values then. So let's call it RGB and then pass CG float, CG float, CG float. So it accepts 3 parameters, and using the RGB we can set it. So RGB dot 0 is my blue color, red color. Dot 1 is my green, and 2 is my blue. So I'm just keeping it basic. These are the key values for each of the values that we are passing, and we'll store it in this one. So whenever there is a change happening, we will track it and then use it to save it to the user defaults. So let's call it here save current color, pass the RGB value. So it's accepting red, green, and blue. So let's even comment it so that we know RGB values to be saved in value saved value passed should be between 0 to 255. So let's keep that in mind. So there's RGB parameter, nothing is returned. You can even return a safe, so success message or failure message, but those kind of scenarios we will come to when we are doing the complex networking tutorials with Viper. So let's start with the basic thing where we're trying to solve a couple of use cases. Here in this case, first thing is like on color change, what needs to happen. We are saving the color and also resetting the background color of our view, as well as changing that text value. So these things are happening. So let's make a print as well to see that current colors are saved. So it's just a validation that our code is working whenever there's a color value change happening. Let's run it and see. So colors are getting saved now. So it's like a blue color now, 58, 112, 158, that is being saved in the user defaults. Now it's easier, right, to just launch it back because we already have the color. All that we need to do is in viewDidLoad, we need to just load it. So let's create a function, load current color. No parameters required. It needs to return these RGB values. So let's just do this again. And let's use user defaults again. Standard dot what do you call it? Right now it is whatever we are trying to save is float. So for the key float, we'll get the red color. Similarly for blue, green, red, green, and blue. So all we need to do is red. We can even convert it into CG float because it's getting saved as float, but we know that it's not going to crash because it's a float type, and converting it to CG float might not have a impact. So red, green, and then let's call the blue. So three things received, and all you need to do is return it as red, green, and blue. That's it. So we have the three things which we need to return. We don't need this, doesn't work like that. So let's compile and see once. Looks to be okay. Add a comment, load current colors, load current color, RGB values returned will be between 0 to 255. So that param, nothing we are passing, but the return will be 3 CG floats which we receive, which we can just use. So let's call it on viewDidLoad, load current color, let RGB is equal to load current color. So that gets us the current color. All that we need to do is just these two, grab it and then use that RGB dot 0, RGB dot 1, RGB dot 2. So we whatever we received, we just applying it here. Similarly, so this should pretty much load our bluish color which we applied again back. So let's run and see what's the initial value it is setting. Okay, so it has set background color, this thing, plus we missed out this one, so which we just need to apply. So let's do that. So color looks fine. All that we need to do is slider value set. Slider set value is equal to RGB dot 1 or 0. And so that's also done. So it's asking for float. So we might just have to convert it into float. So that's also pretty much okay now. Let's change things around and see. It's like a pink. And on relaunch, it just loads that back. So this is working fine. You have covered all the use cases for this app, because all this app needs to do is to show the colors whenever there is a slider change that's happening. It always saves the current color. And the next thing that it needs to do is whenever we kill the app and relaunch, it needs to retain and display back the last saved color. So that's also working now. So this is done now. So this is not the intention of the tutorial. This was just to show how to do this using MVC. Now let's go to how we can build this using Viper. So basically Viper will just create you structure on which we can have these specific use cases where color changes, we need to store that color that can be moved to a different layer called interactor, and we can delegate each and every work that is being done by delegate non-UI work to some other layer like presenter, which we call as presenter, which can actually take up that work and then delegate it to some other layer. Let's say if it is use case specific thing, then it can be given to the interactor. If it is a navigation, which we are not covering in this one at least, if it is navigation change, then it can be taken up by a router. We don't have a model yet. The entity right now, in this case, we don't have any entity, but we can actually call this user default as our entity, because that is something which is persisting our data. So that's something we can move to the entity, which we can call as the entity. So let's go back to our tutorial and let's create something called as home view builder. So this is nothing but something which creates dependencies around a module. In this case, our module is the home view controller. So home view controller will now get associated with something called as presenter, interactor, router, entity. So, and even a view. So let's do that now. So let's keep the UI kit imported here because we need it to, at least in the builder we need it. Let's create something called, so I have a snippet with me which just creates you the whole structure required for Viper, but this will just help you to create all of the classes required. So I'll just do that shortcut now. If you want this snippet, it will be available later in the website which we are maintaining called Let's Code EC. You can grab it from there, but it's just something I use to create the dependencies, nothing more. So let me just explain each and everything that I'll be doing right now. So as I said, this builder is something which creates a structure for you. So let me call this builder, we already called it home view builder. I had some stuff which are not required. It was using, when I created this snippet, it was using something called as module builder, which was just a protocol. I don't think that is required anymore, so I'm just removing that. So we have this builder which was implementing that module builder, but I'm not using it, so I'm just removed it. Then let's, so I have this builder. If you can see that it's creating a whole module and returning a view controller, which in our case will be home view controller. So that's the whole thing it will be doing. But along with creating this, while assembling this view controller, it is actually associating each and every elements of Viper to this view controller, like a presenter, interactor, router, and associating each and every dependencies, and then finally returning that view. So that's what this whole builder will do, and we will see how to even use this builder, which is interesting. So let's start with having a protocol called home view, which is nothing but a representation of your view controller. In this case, is it home view controller. So we are not directly letting any other layer know about this view controller, but it can only happen through this view. So if you need to access a view controller which is very specific, not like a UI view controller, but in this case like home view controller, you can only access it from any other module, let's say only through this home view. So that is a protocol. So when we have this home view, we'll be implementing it later once we are done with the structure in this home view controller. So until then, let's see this. I have this first thing. This is the Viper's V home view. Let's go to the interactor, the I part, which is the interactor. So before that, I requires every interactor will be a class, and it will be implementing something called as use case protocol. So in interactor's whole purpose is to solve your use cases. That's the whole layer which will have your use cases embedded. So that's where you need to go and check for all the things for validation. If you see some UI there, then whole of your structure is in a mess then. So we need to be careful with that. So all that the interactor will do is solve your use cases. So let's create our home, let's call it home use case, and this one as home interactor. So interactor is something which solves your use case. So home interactor will be home use case. In home interactor will be implementing your use case. And so we have the V, I, presenter is P. So let's create that. So presenter will have a protocol called presentation, which will have all the structure or the contract required for each and every delegation which is coming from, let's say, a view. In this case, it's view controller. Typical example being, let's say, on slider change, or else on color change. We are tracking the on color change right now using a delegate that can be delegated to the presenter, so that presenter can ask for that values to be saved to the interactor. That is like solving a use case in this case. So we have this presentation. Let's call it home view presentation. So it's implemented by the presenter, home view presenter. So we have the home view presenter, which is implementing a presentation. So this using Viper, whatever we do is we are only exposing the contract things only through protocols. So not contract, concrete things through protocols. So you will not be able to, or it should be like you should not be allowing your presenter be directly accessible in any other module. So it should only happen through the presentation which we are creating. Similar is the case with, let's say, even a interactor. Any other layer accessing your interactor should be through this protocol called home use case. So this is typically what is called as protocol oriented programming, where you are letting your protocol access any other layer instead of the concrete classes being available there, which is unnecessary. We can keep it as thin as possible using protocols, and then let's just expose that to any other layer, which makes pretty much good sense. So I have some base stuff here which I don't need anymore because that was created for some other purpose. I'm just removing that. So we are still on with the presenter. Now we have the V done, interactor done, presenter done, and then we have the entity. We don't need to create a layer for entity here because we already have the user defaults being used there, which we will move to a different DAO layer, like a data access object, where a data access object will be injected as a service to the interactor, which will just maybe call a save, which in turn will use the user default, which I'll show you in a bit. Let's just let's ignore the E part now because it's already created, and the R part, the router. I'm just creating the structure here. But still we are not using this router in this tutorial because there is no navigation associated, just one screen, and then everything is happening within that screen. So there's no navigation associated. If you had to, let's say, show an alert or something, or if you need to, let's say, move out of the screen to something else, then it makes sense to have a router. But in this case, I'm just keeping it for the sake of it because we are creating a Viper structure. It cannot be like we just keep it as wipe and then leave the R around. And so let's create that as well. Home view router. The protocol should be called as home view wireframe, and then the concrete class should be called home, or at least the class should be called home view router, because this can again be a base class and we can again have derived classes and things. But for this tutorial we'll just keep it as simple, because wireframes, again, you can split it across as multiple wireframes, and then one class can embed it or you use it directly. So that again we are creating miniature versions of a router and just giving access to specific things within a router using these small wireframes. Not in the scope of this, I'll just ignore that, but then that's something we can try out later. So we have this router now, wireframe is implementing that. So that's pretty much the structure. All of the classes are created now. We have all of the classes available. Only that thing that is left now is to associate everything. So I have this presentation which is actually representing your presenter. So if you have seen my earlier tutorial on Viper fundamentals, then you might have seen that presenter is the one which does all of the delegation work. Like, it receives work from, let's say, a view controller, and it just starts giving it to different guys, like it can ask for a router to navigate or show an alert or even do something else, which is very much specific to navigation. So that can be uh, so for that we need an association of router in a presenter. And then another thing is router can presenter can ask the use case layer or the interactor layer to do some use case, solve some use case. In our case, let's say color change, we need to save that. That's a use case. So that can be that has to be done using the interactor. So that's the reason we have a reference of the interactor through the use case. I'm not referring the direct classes. Let's say if it is interactor, it's not interactor. If it is router, it's not router. It's wireframe and use case. And if it is view controller, it's not view. It's not view controller. So let's say this view is not directly view controller. We know about the view controller in a presenter through this view. So that's the whole purpose. Like you cannot have the view controller can have the presenter, like because the direct association is starting with the view controller and presenter is having a reference in the view controller. But if you're having a views reference back, so that's more like a presenter should know about the view controller, but not directly, but through the view protocol which we created here. So that's how presenter knows about the view. So, and one other thing is at least in this structure, interactor should not know about the view at all. That's one thing we need to take care. Like otherwise there is no sense. Like if each and every layer starts knowing about each and every other layer, then it leads to a coupled architecture, which is not great to be have. So that's what the whole purpose is. So the first step, have an association of the view controller, or the presenter is knowing about the view controller through this view. So that's what we are trying to do here. First step, it's a weak reference because we will have a strong reference of presenter in the view controller. That's because it's getting created and then it's getting associated to presenter. So view should be the presenter should know about the view through this view through a weak reference. If you have it as strong, then it will lead to cyclic issues. So just keep that in mind. So cyclic reference we have to avoid by keeping this. And router anyway, we can have a strong reference because presenter has to have a strong reference to router, and it should not be the other way. You can always have you can always delegate it to a work from, let's say, a presenter to the router, and you're not expecting anything back. Even if you're expecting something back, maybe we can have a delegate or something there. Or if you are using RxSwift, then you can have a subscription, or if you're having a closure function, then you can return something back. So it different scenarios, different kind of approach to it. I am strongly going with RxSwift, so I mostly use RxSwift subscriptions for these, but not for this tutorial. This will be basic tutorial just using delegates or protocols. So let's create home view router. Interactor will be, sorry again, I made a mess. It should be wireframe, and use case is using home use case. So interactor is on through this. So that's all pretty much sorted now. Let's also include it in the protocol. Home use case, that's all pretty much done. And then let's come here. So we need to instantiate now the home view controller here. So for that, let's get an access to the storyboard. Let storyboard, I normally will go with this there is another way where I use I've been using r.swift, where I just need to say storyboard dot view controller, and then it will give you the name directly. It's a type safe way of doing it, but for this tutorial I'm just keeping it as this way. So storyboard name is main, nothing to be passed. And all that I need to do is call the storyboard dot instantiate with view controller with identify. So we are not associated identify it. Let's do that. Go here and then add home view controller, just keeping it a small h. That's my identifier now, storyboard ID, which I'll use to instantiate the storyboard. So let's call it as home view controller. So this is where I created the view using this. It's creating a view by using the storyboard to instantiate this specific view controller using this identifier. So that is done. Let's create the home presenter. Home view presenter is created. So here is where we are creating the concrete classes. So we need to create those objects here. Home interactor, then home router, home view router. All that is done. So still we have some errors because we need to start associating view presenter to the view, which we have to go to the view controller now. We don't have a reference here. Let's create that so it can have a strong reference presenter, but we will have not the direct presenter but the presentations referencing it, because we again should only expose the presenter through the protocol defined, so which makes it lean and clean. So that's the approach where I have now the presenter associated to the view controller. Carefully, if you see, have the view controller and the presentation getting associated here. So that's done now. So that error will go now. It says it has no member presenter. Let's compile it once and it will go off. So that's gone now. Now we have to reference reverse reference, which we already done actually, where we have the weak reference var, and then the problem is we are not implemented the view which we created, like home view. So let's go and implement that. So let's create an extension for that. Extension home view controller is implementing home view. So this is actually saying that now my home view controller is conforming to this view. So now my whole of my view controller will be known through this view to outside layers. So that conformance is done now. So it should not give you that error anymore. That's also sorted. Now the final thing that we need to do is router can know about the view controller, because it is required in a way that or we need the current router's references. We cannot directly pass the home view controller reference, but we have to have a association of the view controller in our router. So let's do that. Let's go to the router. So let's say I have this wireframe. Let me just create var view controller, and it will be of type UI view controller. So it's not even the direct home view controller, but a UI view controller, which is referencing that, which makes sense because we don't need the direct reference of the specific view controller in our router. So this will ask us to implement it now. So that will solve it. We have the router knowing about or referencing the view controller now. So that's pretty much done. So this error should also go away now. I think it will last for, okay, let's say it's all gone. Okay, that's successful. So we have built the basic structure for a Viper application where we are not yet moved our features, but then we have the whole structure available now where we can assemble a view controller and then just launch it instead of directly right now using this end. This is the whole thing which starts our application. If you remove it, nothing will launch. If you just start it, it'll be a blank screen. So now we need a way to launch this using the builder. So it's a black screen, nothing is there. So let's go creating that. Let's start using the builder. So if you see the builder, it just, if you have, it's a static function I've created. I will just call the assemble module and it'll return me the view controller by associating each and everything to the home view controller. So that's the whole thing. Let me go here. Let me just okay, let's call it home view. Home view builder dot assemble module is returning me a home view. So this is not enough. We need more stuff to launch it. So let's create a window instance and use this frame UI. Is it UI device? Not UI device, it is UI screen dot main dot bounds. So that's my window which I'm using. To key, some basic stuff which we need to make, and then we need a root view controller. In this case, let's use a navigation view controller, navigation controller. So navigation's not coming up. Go here. Swift navigation. Okay, so that's my navigation controller, basic stuff. So which I will make as the Windows root view controller. It will be my navigation controller, and in the self.navigation controller.view controllers, I will associate this view, home view. I need to, because we are returning an optional, we need to forecast it, but we are sure that it's going to return in home view. So that's the whole thing. So I guess whatever we did now is we disassociated this entry point and then used the application side did launch with options to launch our view controller. So let's see, check step by step. We use the window, set the view controller, which is as a navigation controller, and created our home view using the assemble module, and then set the view control navigation controllers arrays first view controller, one of the element, as home view. So ideally this that much this is what we just need to launch the application. Let's see that. So you can see that the earlier thing is still working, but still it's not Viper, but it is a step the right direction, where we just used it to launch the application, but we are yet to segregate the things from outside, the things from inside of this view controller. So because all of this still logic is still existing in view controller. So as a first step, what are the things we need to do? Let's solve one by one. Save current color and load current color. These things are coming from user defaults, which is actually our entity. So we have to move these two out. So what we can do is create a DAO or something, new file called color app color DAO. Let's call it data access object class app color DAO. It's nothing but a basic function, a basic class which will have save and fetch. I'm just keeping the structure so that we can modify it later. So we just have app colored out, save and fetch, all that we need. So let's start moving this out. This is our save code. So save will accept RGB, which is CG float. and then import foundation, stabilizers. That's bad. I do not want to include UIKit there. It's asking for it. Okay, let's go ahead with that. So we are setting. Okay, we don't need CG float. We can just pass float. Will that make it? Okay, let it be CG float because I don't want to break the structure which we already created. So load will have these three now. Even copy, return. Let's copy it, modify it later. So again, fetch will return these three, so it's returning a CG float. So this is some service I'm creating called DAO, where I can fetch and save the currently selected RGB values. So that's the whole thing which we are doing here. So let's go back and then start reworking the things which we have done. So whatever we have removed now is so load color, current color. We might have to modify this here because CG color, this is a view controller. View controller will now start delegating its work to the presenter. So we don't need this passing these parameters anymore. Let's remove all that. So let's just keep a print. Current colors are loaded. So on first load, what should happen? So it's calling this load current color here and using it to set these values in the slider and everything. So these are UI related things which can remain in view controller, but this is something which is coming from as a use case, so which we can actually delegate it to the presenter. So let's say it's not returning anything, so we don't need this. So let the view did load just call load current color, and within the load current color we will be making a presenter call. Load current color. Okay, let's use a view controller calling load current color, delegating, let's call it delegating load current color to presenter. So that's what ideally is happening. So on in presenter now we need to have a function to do that. So whatever that is, let's go to the presenter. That's my presenter. It has this presentation, which is my protocol, where I'll define a function called on load current color. It's nothing but something which I am receiving. Let's say a request I am receiving from the view controller. So I just need to delegate. I don't need to pass any parameters here. Same thing I'll do here. Load current color. It's my function. Load current color received from view controller. I'm just setting the value. Nothing I'm accepting. Nothing I'm giving in return. But whatever I'll give it. Okay, let's see what I will do with this. So I have this function now ready. So all that I need to do is delegate it to the presenter on load current color. I'm just now giving the work to, we were loading the color here previously from the user default. Now it is being delegated to the presenter, if you can see it. So let's go to the, let's compile it once. Still giving an error. Okay, we have removed lots of things, that's the reason. So these values are not existing anymore. Let's comment it out, because once we receive it we will use it. So it was happening in view.load now, but those part is being delegated now. So let's do, once we get it we will rearrange this one. So now this is fine, it's compiling. So on load current color, let's do, so what are we trying to do? We'll call the interactor function, and interactor in turn needs to have the dependency there. So let me go to the interactor and just create an init for the interactor, because I need to pass the dependency there, which is of the app color DAO, which is app color DAO. I'm just passing this dependency app color DAO. If they are, this just for creation, just for the testing sake. If I have this dependency injector, it becomes easier for testing, so I'm just using it as a parameter. So if you are not passing it, then it will create by default. So let var DAO app color DAO is equal to app color DAO is equal to DAO. So my DAO is available now for use. So in the interactor now, as a use case, whatever we need to do is, we have a function called let's use the same name, load current color and save current color. So let's create those functions here in the interactor, or as a function in use case, load current color and save current color. So I have the use cases now. These are the two use cases which we were solving, and then have these functions in here as well. So this is where the DAO call is going to happen. So whenever we ask, whenever the presenter asks the interactor to fetch the current color, then interactor will ask the DAO to fetch it. So in return it will return that value. So it will return the current RGB. Let's call it current RGB. That's it. You have the current RGB value available. Then all that we need to do is return it. So that's again that CG float. It's pretty basic stuff that I'm doing here right now. So just return the current RGB. Nothing major. It's just delegating and creating the structures correctly, where it's an optional value. We can even force cast it, because we know that it's not going to crash. It's always going to give a result. So we need to make this correction as well here, because load current value is returning this, and on save also we need to call this RGB. We need to pass this RGB value, so that also we need to include in this function. That's it. So that's also done. So this is where load current color use case handled here. So it's not asking any parameters, because it's directly returning from the user defaults. So that's what is getting returned here. And on save, similar thing, we are save current color use case is handled here. So again, parameters passed are these three CG float values between 0 to 255, between 0 to 255, and the return type nothing. So we don't return So when whatever it receives, so whatever it needs to do is apt will call this save, and it will pass this RGB value directly. That's it, nothing more. And once this is done, in response case and all, validation, error validation and all will make sense when we are doing the networking side of things. Here it's pretty simple, so all that we need to do is this. So that's being done now. So we have the interactor solving these use cases now, where the use cases being fetching the current color as well as saving the color. So those are being delegated now to the interactor, and the interactor in turn calls the DAO and then so saves those or fetches those values from and to and from the entities through a DAO. So we're pretty much structured now. We know what is where now. We don't need to always search within this single file called view controller to find our logic. Oh, this is my use case. Oh, this is my UI validation. Oh, this is my navigation. Everything in one place is messy. So this makes it more structured. So on load color, all we need to do now is, you already have the interactor. Load current color call happens. We will receive the RGB now, current RGB. Now how will we give it back to the view controller? How do we know the view controller now? We know the view controller using the view which we have created called home view. So all that we need to do is add a function called maybe load current color, and then pass those as parameters like RGB, CG float, CG float. That's it. We have three. We have this function. I mean, the home view has this, and on save we don't need to tell anything back to the view controller. So there is no delegation happening from there. There's no information being passed. So all we need is load current color. Let's implement that in our home view controller. We already have this implemented, but we did not have a function earlier. We'll just call that load current color. It's received here as an RGB. Let that be there right now, but whatever I was trying to do here is within the presenter makes a call to the interactor, gets the current color. We need to give it back to the view. So we can do that using view dot load current color. Just call that. It'll get called in the view controller. So that's the whole thing we need to do. Current RGB is passed now. So now another interesting thing that you can now do is, okay, this can be optional, it will not crash. So we can delegate this in the background thread, and if in case you need, let's say if something where you need to pass this work to a background thread and you need to update the view in the main thread, then you can actually do this in a async synchronous thread. Like can have this in the background. This work can happen in the background and then have the main thing happening here. So let me just add this here in the background and then update the view in the main thread. So this is pretty much easy now. I know what needs to go in the background. I also know what needs to go in the foreground. Let's also give a weak self and then add a guard, and where is that thing? Tilde. I always forget this. Okay, self equal to self else return. So this is also making sure that weak strong thing is done here. So if it is self is not nil, then it will just do this weak self, strong self. Okay, that's also done. So whatever we did now is simply not add a let. Okay. Why did I have a okay. So whatever we did now is where did I add it? Silly. Okay. So we received this call on load current color from the view controller when the view was loading. Let's say this is where it was view was loading, and we called load current color. Load current color in turn has a presenter call on load current color. So this is received now in the presenter. So presenters now will start doing its work, where it starts delegating the use case. Let's say if it has to load the current color, it calls the interactor and asks for the current color. Interactor in turn has the DAO, data access object. It's pretty good to actually have a data access object have to interact with the entity instead of the interactor directly accessing the entity. So let the DAO do it, and so that DAO becomes reusable and it becomes simple. Like it can just have fetch, save, all that calls, and then once it receives the value back, it's returned back to the presenter. And once it is returned, it calls a function in the view controller through the view and updates it. So happening in the background and main. So that's all what we did right now, and we are still to do something where we implemented this protocol home view in the view controller and this function, but there is nothing here. So what should happen there? This is what should happen there. Whatever we had commented out here is now happening in this function. Let's uncomment that and see what we need to make changes. Okay, so we receive the RGB. That RGB value 0 is set, value 1 is set, value 2 is set here. Whatever we are receiving, we are setting it, and then the whole logic works as is, just that the proper delegation through Viper architecture has happened now. Let's run and see whether it is loading the current value now. It's working perfectly fine. See, I'm changing it now and then relaunching. This change we are not yet moved to the we are not yet delegated to the presenter. We'll do that now in a while, but I'm just changing and checking. I think it was a green color now. No, it was this. Okay, let's make it something else and see. Let's make it pure white. It should be white. No, so we are not fetching it rightly. Okay, let's check what is going on value color change. We did not have any code. That could be the reason. Like on color change, we are okay. Save current color is getting called, but what is there in save current color? Nothing is there, so we have to call that now. So we are fetching the current color now, but not saving it because that delegation has not yet happened. So save current color was earlier happening here itself, where it was calling the user defaults and saving it. So that did not happen. So let's do that again. But if you can see that without saving, it was always loading the earlier saved color. So saving is not happening. Let's fix that. Presenter dot on. We don't have a function yet to save, so let's call that. So let's go back to the presenter. What do we have in presenter now? So we just have load. Let's call on RGB value change. So this is just it. Even we can call on save. No, let's call it on color value change, because that's what the actual thing which is happening. What should happen on color value change? So this name should make sense. So that's the only reason I'm using the same name. So on color value change is implemented, so we will make this call as when color value changes in view controller, it delegates the save work to presenter. So it might need the values to be passed. So let's see what it needs to get. These RGBs again, which are again the color value change should have this. So which are again these three values which we need to receive. Between 0 to 255 will be the values. So RGB value received, CG float again. So all that it needs to do now is, okay, we can call these, it can be dispatched back in the background thread, not necessary, but then I'm just making it a little fun to do. So this is not a big critical thing where you need to just call it in the background thread, but then I'm just making sure that things which has to be in the background thread has to be in the background thread. Save current color, just pass the RGB. So that's also done now. It should save it now because on color change is tracked, and we need to call the on save, we need to call the current. So this is where we call presenter dot on color value change. Still giving some error. Let's compile and see. Okay, it's saying red. Okay, this major problem. So it needs to accept CG floats. I guess this will solve it. So whenever these are all UI specific things. So whenever it needs to, let's say, solve this use case where save current color, I'm just saying presenter on color value change. Even some of the things, no, these are slider values. So okay, let this make sense. So save color change is called now, so it will delegate it to the presenter. Let's see if the presenter has this code. View controller. So in presenter we have this function in the presentation, and within the presenter you have a call happening to the DAO save current color. It's calling the DAO function where it gets saved. So this is also sorted. I think our logic should work now. RGB should be RGB. Okay. So let's do pure white again, which failed last time. So it's pure white. Let's stop the app, relaunch. It's not pure white, not yet. Why? Colors are saved. Okay, it's fine. Last time I don't know what happened, but then now it's getting saved. Maybe I stopped it a little faster. Okay, so you can see that now it's taking color changes. It's calling this color change saved function calls and then storing it on save. All those use cases are now delegated to the presenter and in turn to the interactor, and then in turn interactor tracks all the changes. So things are working fine now. And That's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. A little longer tutorial, but I guess this did make sense to you. I'll be coming back with more tutorials on Viper, a little more complex, each and everything with the a sample application. So until the next time, keep watching and subscribe to our channel, like the video, share it, and then help us in growing this channel a lot more, because we need your support to actually create great content. So until the next time, have a great day. Bye.